The following video has been compiled in order to promote the awareness about child rights, and it is only for educational purposes. Viewer discretion is advised due to sensitive images present in this video. Thank you. Welcome to our presentation on child rights. This presentation focuses on two main issues that need to be addressed in society. Firstly, the issue discussed is the lack of education of children's rights taught to children. Secondly, it's the lack of rights for the refugee children currently in Malaysia.
Hi, my name is Nandika. Hi, my name is Nandika, and I'll be your narrator for the first half of this presentation.
Did you know that in Malaysia, the following case where a child of the tender age of 9 was physically abused with a hose by his stepfather? A place that is meant to be a sanctuary had turned into his living nightmare. He was put in a position where his cry for help would not be heard nor recognized to some. Other than physical abuse, sexual abuse or sexual harassment is a prevailing issue amongst our Malaysian society. Children typically experience violence at the hands of the people they trust most. This is one of the most reported cases in the country. 1 in 10 Malaysian children are sexually abused. The statistics shown above are not only alarming but growing at an exponential rate. We feel this unsettling concern stems from the absence of educating the children of their own rights present in Malaysia. To provide more context for the above matters, we have compiled the following slides to obtain a greater understanding of what is child rights.
What are child rights? Before we get into this, we must know who are categorized as children. By law, a minor is a person under a certain age. However, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child defines a child a bit differently. A child is defined as a human being below the age of 18 years unless under the law applicable to the child, an age of majority is attained earlier. Moving on to the difference between human rights and child rights. As you can see from this slide, children and young people have the same general human rights as adults. This includes the right to life and liberty, freedom from slavery and torture, freedom of opinion and expression, the right to work, and the right to education. They also have specific rights which acknowledge their special needs, such as the right to be cared for by an adult and special protection as they are vulnerable. They are entitled to these rights without discrimination, regardless of their age, gender, race, wealth, and birthplace. Children are not their parents' property, nor are they helpless objects of charity. They are human beings and they are subject to their own rights. Next, let's talk about the Convention on the Rights of the Child. The Convention on the Rights of the Child, also known as CRC, is an agreement written by the member countries of the United Nations. It is all about the rights we have as children and young people. The CRC lists over 40 rights that belong to children and young people. The CRC is part of international law that functions differently from Malaysian law, but we have laws that help protect some of the rights of the CRC at home, such as the Child Act 2001. The UN Educational Guides for Children classify the CRC rights list as the 3 Ps. These Ps are stated in this slide. The 3 Ps are provision, protection, and participation. Provision is where children have the right to an adequate standard of living, healthcare, education, and to play. Protection. Protection is where children have the right to protection from abuse, neglect, exploitation, and discrimination. Participation is where children have the right to participate in communities and have programs and services for themselves. Why are child rights important? As children, they are vulnerable and are classed as unable to make serious decisions. Therefore, they need the dependence and support from their parents or guardians.
Children are innocent, trusting, and full of hope. Every single child deserves a chance of happiness. Thus, their childhood should and must be preserved. Although child rights might seem similar to human rights, there is actually many reasons for separating child rights from human rights.
Moving on, I am now going to talk about the reasons why child rights are singled out from human rights. Children are individuals. Just like any adult, every child is entitled to the rights, either in a way to comment, remain silent, to participate, to survive, to be heard, or to be educated. Children start life as totally dependent beings. They must rely on adults for the nurture and guidance needed to grow towards independence. Moreover, the actions or inactions of government policies and laws impact children more strongly than any other group in society. Short-sighted policy making that fails to take children into account has a negative impact on the future of all members of society. Children's views should be heard and considered in the political process. Their views often go unheard on many important issues that affect them now or will affect them in the future, as they do not involve them in the political processes. Lastly, children need protection, and it is up to the laws, policies, and people to provide it for them. Now, I shall be passing it over to the next narrator who will be continuing this presentation.
Now, you may be wondering what our country has done to implement it from a legislation angle. Does Malaysia have its own laws for child rights?
Before we dive right in, I am Hanna and I'll be your second narrator.
The existing Child Act 2001 covers all laws relating to care, protection, and rehabilitation of the children and to provide matters connected intentionally or incidentally. What is the Child Act 2001, you may ask? What does it consist of? Do parents and children in Malaysia know about it? Well, this law was enacted in order to fulfill Malaysia's obligation under the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. In conversation, views of the child are still not widely acceptable, especially when they try to express their opinions on issues affecting them, when in reality they should be able to exercise their own rights. The Child Right Act 2001 covers 6 specific areas in protecting children's rights. These areas are survival, health, adequate housing, leisure, indigenous children, education systems, aims, and policies. We will be going into greater detail in the following slides. First, starting with survival. First and foremost, a child has rights to survival and thrive into adulthood just like every other individual. Why is this important? When once in poverty, it should not restrict a child's right for survival. A child does not deserve a lower standard of living when facing these situations. Their parents' harsh economic situation does not limit a child's survival, as their life is just as important as their parents. For example, each child is entitled to their birth registration, especially children coming from indigenous minority, refugees that come from rural and urban communities. Without a birth registration, they may be denied access to basic services such as healthcare and education. Without this basic entitlement, a child automatically has lesser chances and opportunities for them, when in reality it is something they have no control of. Besides that, a child has the right to proper healthcare. Current policies and legislation needs to be reviewed to ensure accessibility to health and medical care for all children without any discrimination. These include children of migrants and those without documentation. Hospitals have to be able to provide separate wards or have a pediatric department for children requiring medical treatment. Children's health requires specialist doctors to assess their condition. There is also an overall lack of priority given to mental health despite the prevalent increase in mental health issues. Studies done by Childline Malaysia show that the highest number of calls to the 15999 line is from children, which consists of 1,828 calls. These calls are relating to them expressing their feelings of depression, fear, anxiety, and even some on the verge of suicide. Adequate housing also plays an important role in a child's development. This is to ensure that all types of housing have at least 3 rooms and adequate playgrounds and recreational activities. Children deserve to have spaces for leisure. A child's development is not just books but by play as well. Thus, this is to ensure that more children-friendly, safe and environmentally friendly parks are built in townships and high-density areas. In relation to sports, the provision for more recreational parks and sports facilities are needed. Sport facilities in schools can also be taken into consideration. In relation to indigenous children, more is needed to ensure that they get adequate access to clean water and sanitization. Also ensuring that indigenous families and children have resettlement and progressive integration to society without the loss of livelihood. Besides, priority is given to indigenous children for access to education. This is to incorporate and develop the aspects of their cultures into school curriculum and need for alternative ways of providing education to those not easily accessible. Education. Education plays a key role in a child's development. Good education system, aims and public policies are vital in building future generations. Every child should have an opportunity to be educated well. Thus, development of a flexible education system and assessment methods to cater for students with various capabilities such as special needs children is important.
Next, there is a need to re-examine the current Education Act 1996.
6. Education aims and policies to identify areas of improvement and to ensure accessibility to education for all children as intended by Articles 28 and 29 of the UNCRC. For instance, education policies should introduce a curriculum that focuses on skills rather than theory. This promotes meaningful practical learning through applied approach and trains teachers on effective teaching methodologies. Education is meant to provide holistic and lifelong education incorporating the importance of the family unit, community involvement and participation and formulation of support groups. Lastly, better methods for effective moral education should be implemented to nourish children, such as through project work and community service. Refugees not gaining access to education can have detrimental consequences and limit their opportunities significantly in the future. Refugees are displaced persons who are forced to migrate and cannot return to their home country safely. This is because of the nature of displacement for refugee families. There are difficulties and dangers that are faced by them in accessing basic resources in another country, such as documentation and the fear of persecution by law enforcers. Now, it begs the question, why is having access to education a problem for refugee children? First of all, there isn't any availability of resources. Most of refugees will stay in an under-resourced regions where there is no school to attend. Secondly, some refugees have insufficient documentation, such as identity cards or birth certificates, which make it harder to register in a school. Because of that, there is a fear of them being deported by authorities. Thus, they might further distance themselves from educational institutions. Also, families might not be able to support themselves, so children have the pressure to make a living. Many adolescent refugees often drop out of school to find extra income in order to support the family. On top of that, a lot of children might miss out on their primary education. They might have to go through the syllabus at an older age and might feel too old or left out with the younger ones, or worst of all, denied entry to education. Thus, they assume the responsibility to support the family, which is the case for most older siblings in the family. In order to combat this issue, here are some ways which could help refugee kids in getting their rights to education. Firstly, Adequately funded schools and universities may play an important role, as national education systems will provide funding to the schools and teachers so that all refugee children have a quality education. Funds can be raised via charity and also student parent bodies. Thus, these funding should be used to build more learning centers as well as learning materials and facilities.
The government should provide education for refugee children from primary up to tertiary level. By obtaining education, the refugee children will be led to various employment opportunities. Not only that, these refugee kids will also be able to live a blissful and tranquil life in our beloved nation.
Another option would be to expand on vocational training. This might be a better option for kids who are too old to return to school. They might gain necessary skills that they are good at.
There is also a need for more teachers. The public and private sector agencies should allow for more teachers and better recruitment. To entice teachers, sufficient pay should be allocated to them. Another suggestion would be to allow refugee teachers to teach. This would be easier for the students to learn as they are being taught by the familiar people. Another great initiative would be the Refugee School Adoption Program, which would provide financial support to refugee schools and provide in-kind resources to help the refugee learning centers. Moving on, I would like to emphasize the ways to educate society and highlight the importance on child rights. Firstly, the school plays a huge role. Teachers should educate the children on their rights. The significance and importance of learning their rights should be embedded in the school syllabus starting from a young age. For example, the celebration of World Children's Day on the 20th of November every year is to allow children to feel appreciated and to also promote unity among children. Next, child rights regulation must be enforced effectively. This is to ensure sufficient protection is implemented to deter child exploitation and abuse. Individuals who fail to abide by the law must be prosecuted. An example would be under the Child Act 2001. Lastly, a reliable child helpline must be implemented and promoted to children. It should provide confidentiality, support, and protection to the child. This is to enable them to inform all their concerns, seek counseling, and resolve issues such as children's rights, abusive and mental health concerns. A person's a person, no matter how small. In conclusion, a child has every right as adults and special rights to be afforded care by their parents and guardians. Laws such as the Child Act 2001 are in place to prevent children from facing abuse and harassment, which allows authorities to prosecute the majors. The law includes a child rights to survival, health, education, housing, leisure, and indigenous children protection. We highlighted the issue regarding refugees having access to education, and finally, we brought up the ways to educate society and children on child's rights.
We have reached.
That's the end of this video.
We hope you learned something.
Valuable.
And beneficial.
Thank you for listening.
Don't forget to like
And share the video.
Hope you enjoy it.
I hope to see you again soon. Bye bye.